Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the Sword and Shield stuff, you can go ahead and check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. Now for today's video, I'm going to be delving into a fun format. Yes, I'm involved in a tournament. You may have seen on PTCG Radio, he mentioned this. Myself and a handful of other people are getting together for a fun tournament being run by Dragonshield, which is really cool. Glad to be a part of it. It is a monotype tournament, so we are only allowed to play Pokemon of the type that we are randomly selected, as well as colorless Pokemon. It all has to be standard, non-GX, non-V, non-EX Pokemon. So all one prizes, and we have a limit of 2 copies of every card in the format. So in today's video, I'm going to be going over a metagame analysis, as well as talking about the type that I was given, fighting types. I'm using the copper Dragonshield sleeves, and I've got a copper playmat in front of me, which is really awesome. It turns out I got the sort of short end of the stick, really, when I got given fighting, as I found out as we go through this thing. But we'll be looking at the main threats, what I think is going to be a part of the metagame, and yeah, all that sort of good stuff, because I think fun formats are a great way to keep ourselves entertained, interested in the game right now. If you want to do it just with a group of, 6 or 7 friends or something like that, you could certainly do the same thing that we're doing. Follow this format, make up your own one. There are plenty of Professor Cup formats out there as well, so yeah, there's all sorts of ways you can try and keep entertained. But we'll start off with the colorless stuff, because everyone has access to these cards, so I think it's the most important to look at first, because this is going to be something that you could come up against in any round of the tournament. The tournament that I'm in is a best of 3 knockout, but if you want to do Swiss or something with your friends, these are the cards you need to familiarize yourself with the most. And we actually start off with Aerodactyl. He's interesting because Fossil Fangs does 90 and 90 more if you have no GX or EX, which is obviously always going to be the case, and it is triple acceleration. Well, the synergy there with 3 CE. So even though it's just like a 1 or 2 time use kind of deal because of the nature of the amount of copies you can play, this is an absolute beat stick. So if you want to work in a couple fossils and just have Aerodactyl as like a 1-time use blow up their guy, it's actually pretty valuable, I would say. There are some pretty big stage 2s out there. Cinderace has 170, as does Rillaboom. So capping out at 180 with Fossil Fangs just detonates any big threats. So having this as just like a stage 1, although yes, a little bit more awkward than a normal stage 1, because you have less options to find the unidentified fossil unless you go towards things like Bill's analysis, and that's a whole other heap of stuff. But in general, the fossil is less searchable than just Pokemon with like Great Balls and Quick Balls that we have in this format, and comms. So it's a little bit of an awkward stage 1. But if you want to use him as like a 1-time use kind of deal, he can actually be a decent threat in this meta, so something to bear in mind. He is like a one attachment, 1-shot kind of dude, which is pretty awkward to deal with. From there, I don't think there's that many other like good attackers. Ordino's interesting as being like a bad version of Jirachi for everyone that isn't playing Metal. So you can just draw a card. We have U-turn board, we have Air Balloon, and a skateboard in like as options for Ordino, so you can have it as just a pivot if you want to. I experimented with this a little bit, but I didn't find it that powerful, so yeah, we've not gone for that. Lisi is similar to the Aerodactyl if you want to have a potential big beat stick that you can just 3 CE if you want to. I think it's pretty reasonable to have like a 1 or 2-2 line of something like this with 2-3 CEs, just because of the power spike turns you can have. Can be pretty like detrimental for the opponent. One of the biggest ones, I think, is Cincino, of course. Cincino just giving everyone a general draw engine. There are plenty of types out there that don't really have much draw. Fighting's one of those types that doesn't have much draw going for it, outside of things like Lucario with Garchomp as a combo. So I'm personally definitely going to be adding in things like Cincino and Pidgeotto into my list, because it just lets every deck draw cards, which is a big deal. And Energy Assist is actually also a really nice attack to help around disruption strategies, getting you some energies back in to play. And 40 is like a much more relevant number. You can do setup math for 2-hit KOs in this format. So yeah, Cincino is actually like even better in this format. Delcat is interesting. I think we have enough supporter recovery just in a couple copies of Cynthia Caitlyn. So I don't think it's mandatory to play this, but it can get some extra supporters back immediately into your hand, which is okay. Ditto Prism Star, definitely an option for a bunch of people, especially if you are playing evolution decks, if you're playing stage 1s or 2s, because you are limited to 2 ofs of everything. Just having a third of your optimal basic is pretty nice. And again, if you want to play some like tech Pokemon like Aerodactyl Ditto as a combo with 3 CE, that can certainly be powerful, so something to bear in mind. Dunsparce to potentially help you get set up. I would only think of Dunsparce as an option if you were heavily setup based, like if you're stage 2 based that also has stage 1s for like setup draw. So you could think about this guy though, just because the format is kind of slower, and if you have good stage 1 draw support, like if you're fire for example, and you have things like Salazzle, Magcargo, stuff like that on your side, Strike and Run could be like immense value, so I could see him being decent. One thing to bear in mind though, of course, is that you can only play 2 copies of the Dunsparce, so you only have like a 20% chance to start him in the early game, so that's not that fantastic. But it could be helpful for setup-based decks. Farfetchd, I think, is a really important one, actually. It's not a bad lead for you in the game, because it can draw you 2 cards for 1 attachment, which just isn't that bad when it has 80 hit points, just vanilla. And also it has Tool Buster, which I think is a really big deal, because tools are really, really strong in this exact format. You do 20 and 70 more if your opponent's active has a tool on. So that's important against Malamar, I think, which is one of the best decks in this format for sure, because Giratina Tag is like a disgusting combo, and the fact that they have Lana's Fishing Rod available is just really, really dirty. And as a fighting player, I basically have to play Farfetchd, because otherwise I'm not getting through Malamar's anytime soon. Or Giratina's anytime soon, I should say. So Farfetchd is a card that's going to be a saving grace for me against the Malamar matchup, which I think is one of the strongest decks in this little mini micro meta. So having an answer to that is nice. I also think just like in general, things like Big Charm, Air Balloon, these are going to be commonplace tools because, you know, the ratios of the amount of health you gain are so much more than they are in Standard that they just become, in a vacuum, such powerful cards. So having a Scrapper effect whilst also doing 1 energy, decent amount of damage. Again, going back to my own personal deck, I have no acceleration as fighting, or not very good acceleration options. So Toolbuster is going to be a nice 1 energy attachment. That's also like not the worst lead in the world, so it just fits a couple purposes. There's a couple nice of the baby Pokemon as well that are colorless. I don't think Happini's that great, but I think the Munchlax we'll get onto later, which is a good card in this format for sure. Things like Kangaskhan, again, just the amount of meat that they have behind them can be really nice. Like if I was playing something like Rillaboom, I'd definitely think about having some big basics in there like Kanga. There's quite a good number of stage 2 accelerators in this format. There's Porygon Z, which is colorless, so open to everyone, but there's also like Magnezone that's not only in the Lightning archetype, but also Metal could be playing Magnezone. Grass obviously could be playing Rillaboom, so there's a lot of stage 2 decks that might want to have something like Kanga, just because the amount of hit points that guy has is silly. He's not a bad lead, and also like 80 for 3 in an acceleration deck isn't actually that bad, so that's something to bear in mind. There is this Licky. This one specifically I think is okay. Let's Go Crazy doing 90 and discarding a random card from your opponent's hand at the top of their deck and an energy from their active. Quite disruptive, quite tanky as well. You can put a buff padding on this, for example, and it would be very, very awkward to deal with. It's a really chunky guy that's also like removing resources from the opponent, so I can foresee this being an absolute headache for people. Because when you only have 2 OVs and things are being discarded randomly from your hand and your deck at the same time as energy is being removed, it's a real pain. So yeah, this Licky I definitely looked into. I definitely think splashing in some 3 CE stuff could be a valid option for this meta for sure. We have both 70 and 60 hit point Mincinos, which is relevant when talking about things like Elm, which might be slightly better in this format. Munchlax is this is probably the best colorless guy, because just like all the other babies, he has free retreat, but getting back things like Ball Search is a really big deal in the opening turns. We have a really limited Ball Search pool. It's like 2 Quick Ball, 2 Great Ball, 2 Calm, and then like if you want to play Pokénavs or something, you can. So just having Munchlax for early game Ball Search can sometimes be great, and just a pivot in general is a decent option. Oranguru as well I think is pretty busted in this format, just because the amount of Gust options are terrible in this format. We have Pokemon catchers or 2 custom catcher that you can play for like 1 guaranteed effect per game. So having resource management to get those back is obviously an important deal, or just getting back your coin flip Gust is important. And there's a few archetypes that might want to get back some other things. Also, this obviously opens up Mill. When there's Cincino, Pidgeotto, and Oranguru as an option, Mill is certainly an archetype that you could be considering. Also because just 120 is like bigger in this format, right? Because everything... Well, there are things that you're much more likely to tank with Oranguru in this format, especially if you like Big Charm him, for example. So, yeah, pretty buff guy. There's also this Oranguru just for Primate Wisdom. The Fire decks might want to play this if they have Magcargo available to them, exactly. But in general, like, he can just help sort things out. There are still some discard synergy supporters in the format if you want to have things like that, so stuff to bear in mind. Make 'em Pay as well, another control tool if you really want to. There's the Pidgeotto. Obviously, you can go for an Elm engine if you want to have Airmail open up to you. And I think with a slower format, having stuff like this is a really nice option. The only thing to bear in mind with the specific rules that we're playing is that you have to play more Pokemon of your specific type than of colorless. There's been plenty of decks that I've tried to build that were predominantly colorless based because my own typing is so bad. So I think that's a nice nerf that they did to balance the rules, because otherwise I'd be playing 2-2 Pidgeotto, 2-2 Cincino, 2 Oranguru in like everything and like build that as a base. But they are trying to reinforce that type a lot more, so well balanced by the people who came up with this format. Porygon Z, I think if you're really in panic stations and you don't have anything else to do, you can just build this as like your baseline. Have a couple Kangaskhan, have Porygon Z, and then like a couple of your own type big basic attackers. Because big basics are still certainly like the meta, because if you're playing stage 2s and they start getting knocked out, because you only have like a 2-2-2 line at most, if you prize a piece here or there or whatever, you're not going to have a good chain of attackers. So having just big basics is still like definitely the meta for this format. Even though evolutions are more viable, and I've talked about some stage 1s and stuff, you kind of want to splash those in with basics rather than going like all in on like your stage 2 attackers, unless they're just that good. Like there's some good Sword and Shield ones, like again Cinderace, Obstagoon, those sorts of things have such high hit points that they're just worth investing into. So yeah, stuff like that's good to note. What else have we got going on here? For colourless stuff, I did have some notes, but I've already mentioned a few extra things here and there just as I go through. Something that's quite funny is that Lost March actually has a decent damage output, even if you're just Grass and Trumbeaks. You get to play 2 Trumbeaks and a 2-2-2 Jumpluff line, and that still gets you around that like 120 mark, which is quite funny for some 1 energy attachment smacking in the Grass archetype. I thought that was amusing. Let me see on my notes if there's anything else that I missed for colourless stuff. No, I think that's covered everything in colourless. Alright, let's jump to fighting, I guess, because fighting is my type. So we'll quickly go over my first thoughts where I went through the fighting. And honestly, I do think I've got the short end of the stick. I don't think there's much here that makes me that excited, to be honest. I did think Archeops was okay. Well, initially I thought he was okay. A hit and run approach for 1 attachment isn't bad, and 80 and removing an energy would seem really good, but the amount of archetypes out there that has acceleration is pretty gross. Rillaboom is acceleration, Fire obviously has Charizard or Cinderace and Welds on top of that. Water has Frostmoth, Lightning has either Magnezone or they're probably playing Nuzzlechew, or they could be Zapdos, which is just 1 energy attackers, and Archeops is weak to this. Malamar is acceleration. Dark doesn't have acceleration, notably. But if you're a fighting deck, you shouldn't be worrying about Dark as your highest priority. And Metal has Saucer at the very least, and potential to have things like Magnezone as well. So yeah, energy acceleration is rife, so there's no real point trying to do energy denial, at least via your main attack. So that's stuff to bear in mind. And there's also like the Mincino thing that can do extra acceleration. So overall, that guy is not great. I think probably one of the best selling points I have available to me is Baby Buzz. The Sledgehammer turn is going to be pretty gross. With that Diancie Prism Star doing 140, potentially more because there's Beastites in the format. I can be one-shotting stuff and having like a good amount of hit points on my own end. Only 1 energy committed to myself. So I think Ultra Beasts are going to be important for the fighting strategy for sure. Because there's not much else going on for you, basically. What else have we got? So obviously Diancie just goes in because it's absolutely absurd. This Donphan's pretty okay. We do have, what's it called? Malolana, and we have Last Chance Potion as options to try and make this Donphan work. Initially I did try a couple games with this just when I was practicing this format. It seemed though that Water and Psychic, which I believe to be the 2 strongest archetypes in this format, just auto win this anyway, because Frostmoth has spread from Volk Prism Star, and Malamar has spread through just Giratina pings as well as spell tags. So I didn't see this as a good enough strategy to beat the 2 best decks in format, therefore I just kind of moved on from it. So yeah, it seemed okay until I saw the full picture of what the meta was going to look like. This Excadrill is interesting. It's just basically another version of Oranguru, so I was certainly considering a control-based fighting deck. I wanted to have an Excadrill line as well as a, Grapploct line, and then having the Cinccino's and the Pidgeotto just to help me draw through, and then the Rototiller would be getting back custom catchers, crushing hammers, all the usual stuff, power pads and whatnot. But ultimately I decided, again, going back to Malamar and going back to Frostmoth, I feel like those are still really, really bad matchups for you. Then Rillaboom becomes a much worse matchup for you as well. So I think naturally there's a lot of like hard countering to control in general. So I think the control option didn't seem that strong because inherently so many decks had a lot of answers. And because Sinlin seems like a decent supporter with the card pool that we have available, obviously when you can only play like 2 Marnie and 2 Research, the power level of Sinlin goes up way more because you get to recover the best supporters in the game, the Marnie and the Research, right? So I'd imagine most people would be playing Sinlin, at least like 1 copy, possibly 2 copies. There'll be some people playing Power Pads anyway, like the Fire deck's probably playing Power Pad for more Welders, for example. There's a handful of other decks that could certainly consider Power Pad. So it just takes people to play like a Tayton Liza or a Malolana, and control becomes a lot less viable. So I didn't want to put all my eggs into one basket with Excadrill because fortunately I found a different alternative. This Excadrill is also a potential beat stick. This is where I initially first thought I was going to be going with the 2-2 Excadrill line and going for early aggressive drill bazookas and discarding my own deck and just saying, you know, like playing 2 Brock and playing 2 Ordinary Rod was going to be enough, but just the Ditto and double Drillbur and just 2 Excadrillas like your main attackers just isn't really enough fuel to get you through the game, I don't think, even with things like Baby Buzz potentially, and some other Ultra Beasts that we'll talk about later. I didn't feel like this guy was enough, and also just the fact that Drill Bazooka just isn't a great number. Like looking at attackers that I'm going to be coming up against, 120 doesn't seem to be like a sweet spot in any sort of regard for a lot of attackers, so yeah, he kind of just fell short of the mark for me. But especially because you're a stage 1 and that eats up spaces and there's more consistency issues in a format where there's already consistency issues because you don't get to play like as many Ball Search cards as you would want and as many supporters or like good supporters as you would like. So yeah, ultimately I went against him, but I could certainly see him being an option, like a tech 1-1 or 2-2 line. Not really a tech, but like an additional line rather than the full strategy. So there's the option of playing Garchomp Lucario in this meta as well. Royal Blades capping at 200 is obviously crazy. You can play Pal Pad Cynthia combo with Lucario, but it's just so much setup. And when you're only playing a 2-2 line, I am a little bit sketched out by that as well. The Gibble and the Gabite do have Ascension style attacks, so you can probably get into this guy quite quickly. But ultimately, I didn't like the weakness on this guy, because again, I think Rillaboom is a pretty good option. Even like a lone Exeggutor would be a hard matchup for me. And again, I just don't think Stage 2s ever outrace things like Malamar or Frostmoth. So again, just based on the meta, you've got to be faster than those sorts of decks and put pressure on the board earlier than a Stage 2 would in general. So there's the Grapploct that I probably would have played if I was playing Control, just try and trap things basically. If I was going to go the Porygon Z, there are a couple of Groudons that I could have added into the deck as my big basic attackers, just alongside things like Kangaskhan's, but I didn't feel like there was going to be enough of them to make it worth my while. And this is what I ended up deciding on playing, the Hitmon package, because I think Hitmons are actually pretty strong. Early tempo of Hitmonchan with double Doll seems okay to me. Just playing Doll in general, just to buy yourself free turns here and there, when everything but Fire has like terrible Gust in the game. Hiding behind Dolls seems very valid, and Hitmonchan just early pressure, like with the help of Vitality Band, Diancie, and Dojo, early like 60 pressure, early 50 pressure, that's really good against a lot of things that want to evolve up, and hopefully it can mean I can snipe some early game basics. And then this is really what sold me. It was Hitmonlee. So in a dream scenario where you get like a turn 1 hit and run, turn 2 you can be special comboing and hitting 90. 90 is a sweet spot for Frostmoth. It's a sweet spot for Malamar, which is already targeting the decks that I think are strongest. And just in general, you're targeting basically everything that wants to evolve up. There's a whole heap of Pokemon that even if they just get their stage 1 out, I can still special combo and knock them out and stop their setup straight away. I can target things like Mincinos, which is really cool, or just Cincino also caps out at 90. So I figure there's enough bench Pokemon just in the format in general that special combo will get insane value. And again, in a format where Gust is so pants, having an amazing sniper is great. And literally only Malamar can be playing Mew, so special combo is just excellent for that. And if I'm playing Hitmonlee, I may as well go ahead and play Hitmon top. Finish combo is going to punish anyone playing a Pidgeotto engine, and it's going to punish people just putting stuff down onto their board and setting things up as well. So I am playing 2 copies of Hitmon top, but I could honestly just play like 1 copy and get away with it. I only play 2 copies just for like the option to see it more early or when I want to, I guess you could say. But yeah, special combo is a big board spread. If I ever get to finish combo twice, that could just be like a 6 prize turn. So yeah, I went for Hitmons overall, mainly because of Hitmonlee. He seems absolutely busted. That's what I'm building around, basically. But the Hitmon top is also like a pretty hot meme, and it can really help out if people are going towards Pidgeotto draw, which I think is like on par with Cincino. So yeah, definitely think that could be a thing. And if it means I can take multiple prize knockouts, that's going to be really awesome for jumping ahead in prize race and stuff like that. So yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. And there's plenty of things that have 60 hit points that want to evolve as well. So if I can do it early enough, if my opponent starts bricking or whatever, I can punish them super hard. I thought about Omastar as a potential option, but in general I want my board to have Cincinos and stuff like that, so I went against that option. Not much else that I thought that was that good. More fossil stuff that I'm not too worried about. Regirock is a potential early game option, similar to the early pressure that a Hitmonchan can put in. Enhanced Stomp doing okay. Could think about like Vitality Band and stuff on this guy if I really wanted early pressure, but ultimately I thought the Hitmonchan led me into better turns from then on, so that's why I've not gone for that. Also, it has a hench retreat cost. There's actually a pretty tanky Sandaconda here. It takes 30 less, so it's a 160 hit point stage 1 basically, which is actually a pretty big deal. Power Press only really gets good when there's 3 energies in play though, so I felt like it was too much of a commitment energy-wise to go towards, but he is a tanky stage 1 for sure. Seismitoad is like the worst version of Magcargo, and it ate up too many spaces for it to be worth my time. Stack Attacker is now where I feel I have a decent late game finally. So my early game is Hitmons, my mid game is Buzzwole, and my late game is Stacker, because if my opponent has 3 or fewer prize cards, my hit points is 200. So now I become basically the biggest thing in the format. And top down does 110, 130 with a Diancie buff, and that's when Beastite comes into play. Those early pressure prizes that I've been taking with Hitmonchan, Hitmonlee, possibly even Hitmon top on things that haven't evolved yet, even with Baby Buzzwole clearing something out of the way. I'm hoping that Beastite pushes top down towards that 150 plus mark, so I'm essentially hoping that my late game is just a sweep with Stacker. That's essentially what I'm trying to do. Obviously, I'm playing B-String. You can try and Rosa for Stacker, B-String, and like an energy, and then he's ready to go in 1 turn, which is nuts. I'm opting to go for Beastite over Big Charm, but you could also think about putting Stacker up to, or buff padding. You could think about putting him up to 250 hit points, which I thought was pretty cool, and you could have that alongside Malolana and just be an absolute machine, but I think in general the 200 should be enough. If I'm using top down like twice, I feel like I'm getting pretty far ahead in the late game because I'm expecting to be one-shotting stuff. So I think Stack Attacker is probably the best late game card I can have for fighting. So that's where we're going with that one. You never want to start this guy because he has a ridiculous retreat cost. And you can only play up to 2 switches and then like Sidlin Malolana as extra, Tate and Liza Malolana as extra switching outs, but he is just such a good late game card, and I think with naturally a high count of basic Pokemon in the deck with Hitmons, you can get around that quite nicely. So yeah, I thought Stack Attacker was like an excellent way for me to actually close out games rather than being all in on the Hitmon strategy. So it gives me like a really good early game option and then also a great late game option, so I thought that was pretty cool. Another baby Pokemon in Tyrogue seemed interesting. And I was initially thinking of like Zygarde being great, but I realised that I could only play 2 copies, so he ended up being pretty pants. But yeah, that's where I've gone with fighting stuff. Was there anything else I missed for fighting? No, I think that's everything. So yeah, pretty in-depth into my own type, but that seems like you have to explore the most in the worst typings, if that makes sense. You have to be as creative as possible because some types just get stuff given to them on a plate, you know, whereas other people don't. So I had to really think a lot for the fighting type. For the grass type, I think just naturally Alolan Egg seemed okay. The Exeggutor gets Pokemon into play, the Execute gets Pokemon into play for free, or other eggs into play at least. Tropical Shake is decent numbers. You get to play Shuckle as well. That's already in this class. And just the fact that they're big, 160 hit point, low maintenance style attackers seems really, really okay. If I was playing Alolan Egg, I'd also definitely think about adding in things like the Aerodactyl and stuff like that. And just be like multiple stage 1 rush deck, basically. That certainly seemed like an okay option to me. The alternative for this is something I've mentioned a few times, and that's Rillaboom as like the other main option for grass. Just quick mention, Amoonguss for Poison Sleep. You could try and use that alongside Venomoth, which is another thing that can do 90 snipes with 1 attachment. That's right at the bottom. Venomoth somewhere down here. Where are we? Venomoth, this guy. If your opponent's affected by a special condition, you can do 90. So I could see that as a potential sniper, similar to how I'm trying to use the Hitmonlee. It takes multiple stage 1s, but sniping is just so good in this format that it could be worthwhile. So yeah, there's the Alolan Egg as a potential like lead carry for you. And then it's pretty much just all in on Rillaboom. Where are we? We're looking at... So there's some good Delmise you probably want to use with your Rillaboom. 130 as a baseline is not bad. So yeah, that's just a good basic Pokemon that you can try and power up. But the Rillaboom itself has like 170, so it's an absolute tank. There's Grovars, which can help you get set up. There's this Heracross, which I imagine you would play in the Rillaboom because it does 120 for 2, which is just a naturally good attack. I mentioned Lost March. I imagine it's more of a gimmick than anything else. Kartana is a decent free retreat option that can also have like a big turn, similar to a Buzzwole. There's some spicy hot memes you can try and make with Meganium, but I don't think there's anything that's that much... Like, there's not much payoff for that sort of effect, but it seemed pretty fun. So yeah, I imagine Rillaboom just like being good enough on his own back, because 170 hitting 140, that's getting through pretty much every big basic, and he's usually tanking, so trying to make Boomers work seems like a good play, especially when you get to play the Shaman Prism as well, just to like retreat out of your Boomer and just have Shaman. So yeah, I think Rillaboom is probably the best grass deck you could be playing with just big basics, or potentially Shuckle plus Alolan Egg. That seemed like the only two options, really. There's Tangrowth, but you don't get to play Absol in the format, so yeah, that's pretty trash. This guy is a really good attacker for the Rillaboom deck as well. Heavy Punch being good early pressure, and just punishing your opponent getting set up. But that's really about it for the grass stuff. I would possibly go for the stage 1s over Rillaboom, because you get onto the board faster, and it's less like candy RNG based. And I think it's important to get onto the board faster when Frostmoth is just attacking turn 2, and so can Malamar if they high roll. So yeah, that's where I would be for grass. Let's go on to fire. So fire's interesting. Obviously it's really good in standard because you get to play 4 copies of Welder, but you only get to play 2 copies in this format, so it's a little bit worse. So the DIY Welder might be a decent way to go, where you have Grand Flame 120 and attaching 2, and also having Heat Tackle that does 190. That guy is hitting like an absolute truck. So yeah, this guy doing really good numbers. Also a potential option to have that buff padding on him as well. So yeah, pretty disgusting overall. There's Baby Blound, which I think is actually just okay in this format. Fireball Circus seems fine, but you only get to play like 2 Flint, 2 Energy Retrieval, and 2 Crystal at most. But you can play Double Blound and Victini Prism as like a mini package going on in your deck, and just having turns where you just get through things. So I think that's a decent option, but not like a mandatory card by any means. Blaziken's a good accelerator, but I probably think Fire has enough good accelerators on its own end, so it probably gets outclassed by other stage 2s that we'll look at. I actually think Chandelure could be possibly the meta for Fire. It's really low maintenance. You just need to get out your Chandelure, and you can definitely play things like Duskstone to try and make that a lot easier than just having rare candies from other stage 1 decks. You can naturally gear your deck to having like a really high Pokemon count, and then you just like swarm the board of like Ninetales, Magcargo, Salazzle, like Charizards and stuff like that. So very, very RNG based, but your damage output is like super insane for this format, seeing as though like 70 for 1 is like okay. The fact that you could like go to 200s is just pretty nuts. And you can also cheat out a bunch of nice stage 1s. So I think Chandelure, a little bit RNG, but could be meta. Charizard seems decent as well. Definitely high damage output ceiling there. I think Cinderace is probably the most tempting stage 2 you can play for fire, because it's, again, like something that can self-sustain itself. Has good synergy with Malolana. Has good synergy with just like air balloons and stuff like that. So it's pretty easy to get going. Good synergy with like Salazzle as well, just putting stuff into the bin and then liberoing them back onto the active. So yeah, this card seems good. And again, 190 is that damage cap. Really happy with Stack Attacker being at 200 when Arcanine and Cinderace both cap out at 190. That's a bit of a relief, to be honest, for me. There's Delphox that can burn, but who really cares? There's a nice Entei that's not this one. It's the Rally Back Entei. You can do 120, and again, you're just like a big basic on your own end, so that could be splashed into the list. There's Heatrans, but I don't think they're that great. There's the Magcargo. So essentially, there's like, it's pick your best attacker for fire, and then just have like Magcargo, Ninetales, Salazzle as like all your stage 1 options to just make you draw better than other people. I think Fire is one of the only archetypes that doesn't need to play Cincino. I think basically everything else would. Victini and Volk are also really, really good early game basics. So, well, not early game, but just big basics in general. Either big hit points or big damage caps. So, yeah, Fire has to evolve. They have to do a lot of work. But I think Cinderace or Chandler are probably the meta with just like the best stage 1s you can play, either for draw power or just for like attacking with Arcanine, for example. So let's be honest with water. You know you're playing Frostmoth. Like, there's no way you're not playing stage 1 Rush as water. There are a few other things you could try adding in to your water deck. So Articuno seems okay. Just early game pressure 70s is not bad at all for 2 attachments. It means that if you don't hit turn 2 Frostmoth, you're still doing stuff. This guy hits 200, and you only need to have a stadium in play. So you'll probably play things like double Viridian and then maybe some additional stadiums on top of that just to have extra Dazzling Blizzard options, but 4 for 200 is just not fair. Like, Water is honestly just like so far ahead of everything else because they get to play the best big basics in the game. You get to play Cramorant is not good. You get to play Kragnos if you want to be potentially locking stuff out. I actually think Dugong is potentially disgusting in this format as well. Again, if you want to play things like triple acceleration with some of those colorless attackers like Aerodactyl, you could think about having it with Dugong and just having the dual Blizzard. But I imagine you probably just want to play it with basic waters anyway and just play Frostmoth. The entire Inteleon line is really good. It gets you stuff out, like it tutors for you. So I think Frostmoth Inteleon might be pretty much the meta, and then you just play big basics alongside those. The Empoleons are okay, but like you have Frostmoth, so just don't overthink it, you know? Frostmoth Big Basics is 100% like the best thing you can do with this. There's not much else going on. Inteleon is also just like a 2-energy efficient attacker that can also like set up damage on the bench and get stuff into play. So he seems like a partner alongside this Frostmoth line. Kyogre's just a really good early pressure. Kyurem can do some paralysis if you really want to, but I imagine it's probably like Kyogre and Black Kyurem are probably the best big basics outside of Volk Prism Star. Volk Prism is also like absolutely disgusting. So yeah, all of those big basics seem good enough. You just play that with like a couple of ordinary rods and you're just good to go. You get to play Fiona as well, but you already have the Volk Prism, so you don't really need to. You can play Quag, but I probably wouldn't. I would just stick to the Moth on his own. But Quagsire can be a finisher if you really want to. There is a couple annoying water things, like Memory Melt as an option. There's also Sea King as an option. That can flip coins and remove stuff. Not this one. Is it this one? Yeah. Ripping Horn. If you want to be disruption based, water actually has a couple pieces, but I don't know. Like, it's never better than Frostmoth, I don't think. There's also Swampert as potential draw, but I would think Inteleon, just because it's early game, seems way better. So yeah, just big basics water seems like easily the best deck in the format. Like, not close. You can even play Wishy Washies if you want to troll people that can't hit more than 180. You can play this and just scatter randomly at times and remove damage from yourself. So yeah, that's pretty busted for sure. Lightning seems like it has a couple options available to it only. You do have potential for Zeb Striker for draw, which is okay. Vikavolt I don't think is good enough because you only get to play 2 Charger Bugs, and that's like the cornerstone of the deck. So the main meta I think is probably going to be a Mulga Nuzly deck. Nuzzlechew probably being a good option for you because you can just still have like your couple Pikachus, your couple of Molgas, your couple of Pachirisus, and also you get to play Dedenne. So yeah, and this guy's a snipe as well. So yeah, Nuzzle Shot being like a decent early game snipe is also not bad at all. So I think the Nuzzle deck just seems okay. It's got a combination of heavy hitting and sniping, and it's not too much setup because you just need a couple of Raichus, and your early game is fixed quite easily with the Mulga. As soon as you find a Mulga, you can just Nuzzly gathering your stuff out. So yeah, that seems to be a pretty self-sustaining Lightning deck, and probably one of the most consistent decks in the format that we've talked about already. Yeah, probably the most consistent deck in the format. Definitely more consistent than mine. Definitely more consistent than Rillaboom. Probably more consistent than the Fire deck, unless they high roll Salazzle like turn 2 or something. And probably about as consistent as Frostmoth because it has Inteleon naturally. So yeah, Lightning gets on the board quick, has sniping, and that's just with Nuzzlechew like on its own. So yeah, that's pretty insane. It has a couple other snipers available if you want to have a Galvantula package. This guy can also get back things like Electro Power, which is pretty cool. Get like early game getting back Bull Search and stuff like that could also be an option for you. So Galvantulas aren't bad for, again, just like early pressure stage 1s doing stuff. Lantern could be a potential big sweeper for you if you want to have him just like sat on the board doing like he has an inbuilt EXP share, so you can eventually just build up a Lightning Strike for a knockout. I don't think it's that great though. So I think if you're not playing Nuzzlechew, you're probably playing Magnezone Big Basics, because we know there's some good stuff out here for sure. In terms of the basics, there's the Raichu, of course, that you can use Powerful Spark with. But if you want to play Zone, there's the Coco that can do really good damage. It can do 100 and has just a 1 retreat cost. There's Coco Prism, of course, which is just a good attacker as well in this format, which is pretty tragic. You've got Xurkitree, which can do okay numbers, but I think the best one is Zeraora. Discharge just seems really insane. So yeah, there's some really, really good options for Lightning in terms of basic attackers. So if you just want to play Magnezone Big Basics, that's certainly okay. Zapdos is okay, but you don't really have enough pivoting options in the format to make it work. If you want to play like a couple copies of Adventure Bag and Air Balloons, potentially Zapdos can be okay. But it's probably just an early pressure card that you like pivot out of eventually and just have like a better late game option. I think Nuzzlechew seems like the meta, but Magnezone could also be an option if you just want to play Magnezone stage 1s. The cool thing about Magnezone is you get to play the Magneton if you want to get some supporters out. You do like blow up one of your Magnetons, but it can get you towards stuff like in the late game, which could be pretty fun. But yeah, Nuzchew sounds really, really good. Similar to Water, it just seems like Malamar is certainly the meta. You can play Aegislash if you really want to instead, and have Trash Slash as your main option. Obviously, this guy like keeps recovering himself, so it's very similar to Malamar in that regard, and is maybe even less setup based. But your damage output is like way worse than the Mali. The Mali gets to play basically its entire Pokemon line. You get to play Baby Blound, you get to play Mimikyu, you get to play Esper, you get to play Giratina, and am I missing anything? You get to play Mew. So you literally get to play a full Malamar deck just as 2 copies of the actual Squid line, which is a little bit of, like, it's a bit worrying, but naturally, because you have Spell Tag anyway, you just play 2 Lana Rod, and, like, it's fine. You get to play that with Ditto, and Squid just seems, like, really, really, really disgustingly good. I'd even play, like, 2 copies of Esper, because early game it can just be a draw option. Oh, sorry, Mimikyu. Yeah, so Psychic just seems like it's Mali or bust. There's also just a quick note is that you can also play Shedinja as an option in your deck. If you want to play some sort of wacky control thing, you can play Shedinja, but the meta certainly seems like you should be playing Mali, and if not, like, what are you doing? Because Squids just seems absolutely disgusting. There are some other good cards in here, but, like, why bother when you have Squids? So Malamar is, like, definitely, like, just the play for Psychic. There is stuff like Shedinja, which might be worth noting if you want to have some win more option in there. If you want to go crazy and play like Nidoqueen, you can, but it's just way too much work when you could be playing Squids. Just seems disgusting, to be honest. Malamar seems super broken. I can't, like, the only nerf we had in this format was Frying Pan. I can't believe they didn't nerf either Giratina or Spell Tag. It feels like one of those definitely needed a nerf because disgustingly strong for me. Dark doesn't seem like it's chocked full of options. There are a couple things here, though, which is okay. You get to play Absol, which is like a generally just like good card, and is a surprisingly like good attacker in this format. There's potential for Darkrai Prism just being like a good standalone attacker on his own as well, because he's just so big and self-sustaining. You've got Obstagoon, which I think is probably the best stage 2 you can play, because spread damage is just decent in this format. Obstruct is good numbers. There's a lot of things that I've mentioned already that are big basic meta. So you're potentially countering like some fire attackers. You're denying Frostmoth a lot of the time. You're denying Malamar a lot of the time as well. You're hurting fighting if you're expecting them to play Hitmons. You're annoying for Metal if they're going down Magnezone route as well. So Obstruct is just like a very, very strong attack in general. And when it's a 2 energy attack on a 160 hit point stage 2, it's just like good, especially because the basic and the stage 1 have like upsides as well to them, which is pretty cool. Another thing that I think is really awesome is another Ultra Beast is potentially in this format where you have Red Banquet. You can have a 200 hit point Guzzlord just banqueting through everything, which is pretty insane. Very similar to how I have the late game option of Stack Attacker. You can try and have a dark late game of Guzzlord just banqueting through additional prize cards. So I think that guy could be potentially very, very disgusting if people build that into their late game. Hoop is okay if you just want to have early pressure. There'll be a lot of things playing abilities for early game, just setup in general. But I don't think his damage output's that strong. You have Sharpedo, which can set himself up for Bad Fangs, which actually isn't that bad of an attack in this format. Like 120 is not actually like that good, but if you can make a push, it's kind of like okay. Spiritomb's not bad in this format, but you do get wrecked by Malamar, which is the best deck in the format. So yeah, Umbreon and Weavile both seem like decent stage 1s. So for me, it basically seems like you want to be playing Guzzlord and like just alongside Obstagoon. Probably just Obstagoon, Guzzlord, basically. Very, very odd, but you can use the Goons to set up the Guzzlord to take additional prizes. You can have dolls in your deck as well for just early game, like manual attachments and stuff like that. So that's kind of how I see it going. I don't think there's many other options for Dark, to be honest. Maybe there's some Sableye stuff you could be doing. Yveltals aren't the worst, just for extra early basics, because they have free retreat at the very least as well, and they can trap stuff. So I think that's probably the meta. Maybe adding in some Umbreons. Dark doesn't have that much inherent draw at all either, so they're probably playing Cincino and Pidgeotto probably in addition. So yeah, Dark doesn't seem that strong. Outside of that Guzzlord, which seems crazy good. And then we have Metal. So Metal did have Frying Pan banned as the only card banned from this format. But I still think they're very, very okay. They get to play double Jirachi, which is really cool. They get to play Magina as well to pick up tools, which I also think is big, because I've mentioned a lot things like Big Charm, Vitality Band, Air Balloon. All those sorts of cards are really, really big cards in this format because they're just much more impactful when things have lower hit points. Extra damage is more impactful, as is extra extra hit points, right? And like buff padding and stuff. There's a good number of buff padding potential users in this in this typing, so having Magina to pick those up and put them down again seems really cool as well. Berserker for extra damage modifier seems okay. So there's a lot of different options for Metal in terms of support. It's just I don't know what the best attackers are. For me, it feels like you're probably going down the Magnezone route more than anything else. You have Celesteela as a nice Ultra Beast option for a 1 energy 160 on a specific turn, which is okay. Copperaja is obviously like hench, like huge. That muscular nose really is crazy. This could potentially be the build around. If you want to play a stage 1, you just play a couple Copperajas, and then you just play like colorless stage 1s alongside that and have like Berserker as damage buff, because again 220 is just silly numbers, and the amount of hit points you can give this guy is just crazy. So that's disgusting. Empoleon, pretty trash. Berserker we've mentioned. Genesect I think is one of the reasons why I'd probably play Magnezone. It never has the effect of his ability, unfortunately, but Splitting Beam doing 30 and 30 to 2 other things is like really, really dangerous to a lot of archetypes out there. Especially like if you get the turn 2 Candy Zone and you just start split beaming, because you have 130, potentially more hit points with tool investment, it just gets really, 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 really like oppressively strong, to be honest. What else are we looking at? So there's the Magnezone for Rain Dance. there's potential for things like Melmetal to actually be big, because healing 100 and being potentially a 200 hit point body is actually pretty hench. So yeah, this is... Metal is just like, it's a lot of meat to get through no matter what you're playing. So yeah, another potential great Pokemon you can play in the Magnezone deck, or just even if you're playing like Copperaja or something, you could just play one of Solgaleo Prism. Corona Impact, obviously a decent attack as well. There's also the Thwomp meme if you really want to go down the Thwomp. It's actually quite easy to get him set up and powered up by playing like the Maniacs and stuff like that. I don't know how consistently you can get multiple 4 retreat cost Pokemon out though, so I imagine the meta is probably either something like Melmetal heal or Copperaja heal, or just Magnezone big basics again. So yeah, that's pretty much the toss-up for Metal. And I think that's everything, because in this meta there is no Dragon or Fairy in the tournament that I'm in anyway. So yeah, quick rundown. If you're Grass, you're going to be Rillaboom or Alolan Eggs. If you're Fire, I'm expecting probably Cinderace plus stage 1s or Arcanine Blown stage 1s. Frostmoth is definitely the best water deck. For Lightning, I think Nuzchew. For Psychic, it's Malamar for sure. For Fighting, I'm stuck with Hitmon memes with late game Ultra Beasts. For Dark, I imagine it's Obstagoon Guzzlord as the main option. And for Metal, I think it's probably Copperaja as the best option, or Magnezone Big Basics. And in general, there are some good 3-city attackers like Aerodactyl, Licky Licky, and there's good draw engines from colourless stuff in Cincino, Pidgeotto, and Delcatty. So my round 1 opponent is playing Water, so I'm expecting that my very sad fighting deck is going to get absolutely bodied by Frostmoth, which is a bit of a shame. But if that's not the case, I might be able to go further in the tournament. Who knows? Hitmons actually seem like they have a decent chance against a few things. Interestingly enough, I can play... If I'm playing Ultra Beast, I get to play Car Envoy to actually get through Obstagoon. So if I want to cover my bases against literally every matchup, I can have an answer to Obstruct in Ultra Forest Car Envoy. And again, I think Sinlin is one of the best cards you can play in this format as a supporter, just naturally. Like, everyone's going to be playing Rosa, Marnie, Research, Sinlin. I think that's like your 8 base supporters that everyone plays. Probably 10 base with just regular Cynthias as well. And then like any tech supporters you want to add in, like Tantalizers, Bill's Analysis, and like potentially Hapu. Those sorts of cards. If you have discard synergy, Hapu's like absolutely nuts as well. So obviously Fire will play Welder. So yeah, I think that's where my head's at with this format. Let me know if you've given any thought to any fun formats. Let me know any other fun formats you'd like me to review, because there's not much else to talk about these days. So yeah, I hope you did enjoy this ramble, even if you're not thinking of this format at all. It's fun to always explore new formats, and as you know, I'm competitive in everything I do, so I'm going to put the time in and explore the format and try and get through with my crummy fighting deck and see how far we can go. So thanks so much for watching, guys, and I hope you enjoyed. Hope you're having a good time in isolation right now, keeping your spirits up, and I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.